Perfect.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much all for coming, and I'm sure you'll join me in welcoming not two of the best, I think the two best directors in the world at the moment, Deborah Warner and Ivo van Hove, who we are really genuinely privileged to have here. Both of their productions have enormously influenced me and the artists who work here, so it's fantastic they're here. So what we're going to talk about today is sort of going to be Greek influence and talk about classical work, but we might also just talk more generally about directing and approaches to theatre and the differences between maybe Europe and Britain and how these plays are interpreted, but also how these particular artists have evolved. So I thought I might begin by saying that as artistic director here, for me, programming this season of work was a very clear initial gesture about going back to the roots of Western drama, to try and understand why we make plays, myself as a new artistic director, thinking about why we put any theatre on, for that matter, and that was all very clear to me. But when I thought about the Medea that I'll be doing, and my own personal work as a director, I found it much more complicated to think about why I had picked that text or even that moment. So I wondered if I might ask both of you to just maybe talk a little bit about how you choose the projects you take on, and what brings you to the text. Maybe, Ivo, should we start with you, because I know you've just opened your history cycle in Vienna, is that right?
Yeah. Well, but actually it's very simple. I have to be in love with something, and then I can direct it afterwards. If there's no love story going on, then for me it's or not worthwhile doing it, or not important to do it, and then better not do it, because I have to inspire. It starts with me making a choice for a text or a novel or a film script on stage, and I have then, well, I can be inspired, but I have to give my inspiration to other people, because I will not be there on stage, you know. Yesterday in Vienna they played without me, I wasn't there. And they have to do it, so in order to convey the inspiration, or to fuel actors and a team and things, you have to be, it has to be a total love story. And for me, love stories, when I look back at what I've done, it can also be very awkward ones sometimes. You know, it's not always the best play or the this, but I need to feel an urge in a text, a necessity to do it.
And where do you find, where do you go looking for dates? I mean, what?
But that's very hard for me. It's good. But that's still the hardest thing for me. I've made one decision in my life to try to make my decisions as early as possible. So, for instance, when you talk about the Kings of Wars, which opened last Friday, this idea already emerged in 2009, and really the moment of decision that we were going to do it is 3 years ago already. So I love to make decisions most of the time it's 2 years before I do a production. Why? Because that means that I really have to consider very well if I will be interested in 2 years' time in this material. And if that's the challenge that you give yourself, then you read it not only once, not only twice, but you really read it very carefully, and you really talk with your team about it, and then you make a decision from the heart, but also from the mind, that you think, okay, this text is so important that in 2 years' time it still will be important. Yeah.
So for each show that realises itself on stage, how many do you start and then abandon in your head, conceptually, or
what do you mean?
Do you explore other productions with the company and then not make them?
No.
So once you've got an idea. Yes. All right, Deborah. What about you? Tell us how you come to your work.
I mean, similarly, one has to be in love. Although I have a feeling the falling in love happens when you start the work proper. So I think my choice is often, certainly when I was a young director, was to do with something that was seemingly so difficult that I thought it would keep me going, and then the relationship could develop alongside it. So I think I went, when I was a young director, for things I just did not know how to do. I think that's what it was, and I hoping that this challenge would push me, I suppose, to to create something that I didn't recognize or something that felt to be new. So I'm not sure that it's not the hardest bit of the job, all of this, coming to this and auditioning these ideas can be very difficult. It also very much helps a lot of what you're talking about, I think, is because you have a company and you are discussing with the company. I had a company as a young director and was able to have those discussions with those actors back then. But then I started the important working relationship in my life with Fiona Shaw. So in fact, one was looking to find projects that would be exciting for her or make sense of her. So it's very frightening, I think, if you were doing any of this, in an isolated way. You're just having a chat with yourself about a text endlessly. I think you could get very locked in. So it is about discussion and the reason why you're hunting things, and maybe being inspired by looking for properties for somebody. So of course, my work with Fiona, there are so many wonderful parts for actresses, and there is a ceiling within the traditional places of search, and then we started therefore searching outside. So that's when we took T.S. Eliot's poem The Wasteland and went on from there. So we started looking for other materials, I guess. So it really, it helps to have a company, or helps to have a muse, or helps to have a theatre, or helps to... It's difficult. And I can remember feeling, Fiona and myself, an immense sense of failure when we began with the Greeks, which is why we're here. And we then came back to the Greeks, and I thought, oh no, we've gone full circle, and we were very concerned about that moment. And we began with the lecture, and we then, actually about 13 years later, came back to Medea, and I thought, oh no, have we done everything in between?
So I'm just going to stay a little bit longer on this idea, on this choice moment, because I know that for a lot of, directors in the audience and thinking about the material is so difficult. I mean, do you think there are any bad reasons for doing work? I mean, when you think back to the work you've both done, and you think, oh, well, I made this for this reason about the dead body, or for working with a particular actor. What are the things to avoid, do you think, like bad faith?
Repetition, I would have thought. I mean, the bad thing is doing something a bit like something you did earlier, because you know you can do it. A very good reason if your commercial producer was thrilled with you and just wanted another of the same. But I think from a personal point of view, that may not be... they're very private, bad reasons, aren't they? I mean, I would... very attractive to do something that you recognise and have another go.
And what about you, Ivo? Have you got any bad reasons for?
Just never do something you don't believe in. That you just do because you need a job. Well, it's hard to say, of course, but just to need a job or whatever. Or I would never avoid that.
Good. Well, let's come on to the Greeks. So Deborah, tell us how you got into the Greek repertoire initially. What was Electra was the first?
Yeah. I was tricked into it, actually. I was tricked into it by the Royal Shakespeare Company, which was in 1988. I'd done my first work there in 87, which was a production of Titus Andronicus, and then my second, which was a King John, because they kept on giving me obscure Shakespeares that everybody else said no to. And then they had an actress in the company who I didn't particularly know, called Fiona Shaw, who'd mainly done high comedy for them. She was the kind of jewel in their crown of comedic performers. And they thought it would be a good idea to put her and me together on Electra. And I thought that may be a good idea because that's quite frightening and difficult. And then I began to look at it, and then I really got frightened. And so in traditional mode, I tried to get out of it. It's something I do a lot of. I was too late, so I couldn't get out of it. So there I was going forward to, I think was absolutely, possibly the most important work of my life in some respects because of how it fed future work, but by every definition the most difficult. Unbelievably difficult, our Greek plays.
Share some more of those difficulties.
Well, I mean, on a practical level, we had 6 weeks rehearsal, and by the end of week 3, we hadn't got anywhere. And by not getting anywhere, we had failed in the room to make sense of what the chorus were. we had failed to lift this text off the page, and nothing was going on. But I couldn't move beyond the first scene, because without these problems being solved, there was nowhere to go. There was no point going to the second scene. The chorus was still there, Electra was still there. There was no way forward, and that's very frightening. And it is a very long time ago now, but it was my reason for having gone to it. I suppose there are negative inspirations, aren't there? Is that I wasn't entirely enamored of what I had seen in the theatre when it came to Greek plays. I was told they were potentially extremely emotional experiences for an audience, and I'd not ever been affected by what I'd seen. So I had gone in with a translation by Kenneth MacLeish, who's now dead, but it's quite rather simple, rather accessible, in the hope that we could approach this emotionally. And that was not happening. And I remember it was in week 4, I did something that I've never done and would hate to ever do again, which is I thought, because we're nowhere, we'll do a run-through. So we were in a very grim little rehearsal room in the Barbican, the downstairs pit, and we did a run-through at I would say probably at the end of the 4th week of rehearsal. So we were quite near to Orestes resigning because of a drug problem, which came at the end of week 5. he was still with us, and we did a run-through, and something astonishing happened. And I wasn't expecting it, and I don't know how she did it, but Fiona did the thing that was impossible in the rehearsal room. And she approached it emotionally. She took grief to be a defining, almost a character, I suppose, and she went. And she went somewhere so dismaying that I expect she possibly shocked herself. And then I just saw the possibility that this could be done emotionally. Not the only way to do the Greeks, but that it was a possibility. And then we were able to start work.
How did you come into contact with Greek? What was your first...
Bacchae.
Bacchae, uh-huh.
When I was very young, I think I was 26, 27. And I remember Patrice Chéreau, I don't know if people know him as a director, but he said, I'm constantly circling around the problem, that's the Greek tragedy, you know? It's just difficult, I think, for a director and for actors to do it. When I go to see a Greek tragedy today, there's most of the time, 2 things happen. The one option is that you turn this whole thing in, Medea is just the woman next door also. Tame it, make it into a domestic tragedy. Perhaps a good one, but a domestic tragedy. The other thing is blood, big screen, things like that. So a big theatrical, abstract event. Both things are, I think, wrong. But to find the right mixture between humanity and between the political, because there is in every Greek tragedy a real political dimension also. So it's bringing the political dimension together with human emotion, and it's difficult because Antigone, for instance, has 3 scenes. It has to be done in 3 scenes. I just did Richard III now as part of this. He goes on and on and on. You know, he has the Greeks always give you. It's a Greek tragedy that lasts for, I don't know how, Medea was 1 hour 40 or something. It's 1 hour 40, it's not longer than that, you know. So you have to do this immense, intense story where you have to bring humanity together with the political dimension. You have to deal with community, with society in the form of a chorus. It's a lot, and the text is always very, it's not a lot of text, so you have to, it's very, very hard. It's very, very hard to make it into a production that for an audience is also something that can be moving, but in the right way. I mean, not moving, crying, but like what you tell about Fiona, I can very well understand that helps, you know, because there is a lot of emotions, but if you become too emotional, then nobody will. It's very hard to find that right mixture. So therefore, I think every theatre director tries to avoid Greek tragedies, while at the same time we all know it's so important. It's because it goes to the core of every Greek tragedy, even the ones that are not so famous. When you read them, it's about something essential.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. It's about something totally essential,
Yeah.
still essential today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if they're there to be avoided or very difficult, I'm interested in, many people commented on your View from the Bridge, which is probably your work best known over here, that it had a Greek or classical quality, and that you had made Arthur Miller feel Greek. Did the Greeks inform that production at all?
Yeah, but the View from the Bridge was written originally as a one-act play. Nobody knows it anymore, but the one-act play is still there. Now these days always the two-act play is played, which I did also. But in this one-act play, he said once about it that he wanted to write a modern Greek tragedy. So that's what I, in my research, found. And I went to read it, the one-act play, and it is different from the two-act play. And it's much more about Eddie in that case, and it's much more, the women are not so important in that play. What I did is, with the View from the Bridge, is I took his theatrical concept of the Greek tragedy from the one-act play, and I brought it together with a much more refined, emotionally and emotionally and psychologically much more refined two-act play, where the women, the two women, but most of all the wife, Beatrice, is much more important and much more developed. So I brought these two things together.
Mm-hmm. Good, interesting. So let's just talk a bit about acting then, because you've mentioned Fiona there, and I think just beforehand we were talking, you said that what she was doing in Electra was almost not your directing so much. It was almost impossible to direct. It was sort of witnessing, I guess, to a certain extent. And Ivo's talked well about the need for size of emotional gesture without sort of histrionics for the sake of it. What do you think is the key to approaching these sort of in performance as an actor, these kind of plays?
I think the actor in question, I mean, as this conversation began, has to be in love with the essence of what it is that this character is holding. I mean, I don't think Fiona Shaw was in love with grief, but she did understand what it was. And I think, strangely, we came to Medea just thinking about the Americans. We were searching for a project, and it was going to be either Hamlet, in fact, with Fiona at the Abbey, or Medea. And I read a given translation of Medea and said, you know something, this is a bit like doing Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, let's have a go at doing this. So none of this is both true and untrue, but you have to find your ways into this. So I think the principal actors in these have to be absolutely fascinated because, and I think there's one very important thing to say, I don't think these plays are found through the speaking of these words. That is why it's terribly, terribly hard. You know, that normally is what we trust in and hope. You know, these are not great pieces of poetry. I'm not sure they ever were, even if we spoke ancient Greek. But there is this surface of text, and way underneath this, you have to be searching something else. And finally, these two pressures will come together and release something. But that's very difficult rehearsing, because most people's understandable fallback position is go back to the text, speak the text, something will happen. Speak a Greek play text, and it is possible that nothing will happen for weeks and weeks. And that's very difficult. But they are, of course, essentially, and all these plays we were mentioning, you know, they're about families. That is simply why they're great. They are about the family.
So if I'm fascinated by this idea that the text is only a sort of a membrane for the situation, I guess, or the context. How, as a director, do you help unlock that?
Well, it helped struggling the first time, because I think by the time we'd worked on Electra, we were able to take all of that experience into Medea. At least we knew that a huge amount of the work in the rehearsal room had to be researching the backstory, which, let's face it, you know, is there to find, and so off you go searching your various storylines depending on which play you're doing. So that made the second outing a little bit better. But there's always problems. You know, the first time I did Medea was at the Abbey. We did it 3 times, then in the West End, then on an American tour. The chorus of the Medea at the Abbey came to me after the second week of rehearsal and said, I'm sorry, we can't do this play because we don't agree with killing children. So then the entire thing ground to a halt for a week while we discussed the problem there, got rid of the chorus who just couldn't do it. She said, you know, I'm not sure I agree with killing children, but that's not exactly. So, you know, they bring the best out in people.
And did you do a lot of improvisatory work, or was it, I mean, if you're not working off the text, what were your stimulants in rehearsal?
Golly, I mean, one grabs anything that's going to help. We watched documentaries of David Beckham playing football to help with Jason. We pushed back and back into the, I mean, anything to help and inspire, and but the stories. I mean, the back stories, particularly.
So it's almost like a Stanislavski. I mean, it's
well, no.
I'm just interested in the relationship between psychology. I mean, because is psychology, or the way we think about psychology, helpful in Greeks?
It depends what you're trying to release. I mean, there are many ways of doing these plays. I mean, I was trying to release pure emotion on Electra. I wanted it to be about nothing but the essence of grief, because she is nothing but that. She's made grief a character. She doesn't exist outside of her grief. Mm-hmm. But to get to that, you have to, A, strip everything away from the actress. I mean, Fiona was endlessly trying to work with props. We were smoking. She lived in a courtyard with cigarettes hidden in corners, and we were smoking. And bit by bit, everything was pulled away from her, which was a grim experience. So finally, she was this pillar of grief. But to get to the grief, you have to understand her backstory. So fortunately, with the Oresteia, there's a lot of plays to read. I mean, a great amount of reading of the other texts. I mean, the wealth of stuff is there. But I think it was really backstory all the time. You have to hold on to that to get anywhere forward. But you don't find it in the words in front of you at all.
Okay. And what about you, Eva? How do you find working with actors on Greek material? Is it any different to anything else?
It is different. For instance, with Antigone is my recent experience now. But it's comparable, I think. I told Juliette, well, go and read Oedipus in Kolonos, because that's the woman that lost a father just a few weeks ago, a mother a few weeks before, and now she lost 2 brothers the night before. So that's the starting point. So it has to do also with grief and mourning. Mm-hmm. So I said the starting point is not a stubborn girl. It's not somebody who made a decision against Creon. It's somebody who goes for an emotional impulse to bury her brother. And there's a strange thing in when you read Oedipus in Kolonos, a play that's not often produced. There's a scene between Polyneikes and Antigone, and everybody, a lot of people write in literature that there is this incestuous thing going on between the two. It's not at all, because she's very critical of him. Mm-hmm. That she blames Polyneikes to go at war against her brother, and she says, don't do it. But once he's killed, then this is all gone, and it's just a dead body. It's her dead brother, and then she goes for her emotional impulse. So it's not. For me, that was very important. That Juliette, and she totally agreed on that from the first second on. But it started from somebody in a deep mourning. Mm-hmm. And not somebody who had ideas about Creon or his policies. Or not at all. She couldn't even. She cannot even think about it at that moment. So that was the starting point. It's the same. You have to go. I had to go back to Oedipus in Kolonos to understand that starting point. And you could say that at the end of Antigone, Creon ends the same way that she starts, because then he is lost. Because everybody forgets that also a brother has been. His son has been killed. One of his 2 sons has been killed in the same war, civil war, and then Haemon kills himself, and his wife kills him. So he is in the same situation at the end as she is in the beginning. You know, and that's the way that we that we worked on it.
Do you find working with actors that it's about encouraging them into emotional spaces that are greater or more complex, or about paring back to something more like your description of the cigarette stealing? I mean, is it... Because
I try to push them, but that's what I do anyway.
And how do you go about that? That's what we want to know.
No, but I don't know. Well, I really can. I have no formula. You know, I'm not a guru. I don't have a system, and do the system. I wouldn't know. So I deal with every actor individually.
So with someone like Juliette, who's obviously had a big background in screen recently, it's a emotionally huge role. How was that calibration?
With her, of course, it started together. We decided on the play together. Well, actually, that was quite strange when I think about it now, because when I first met her, that was 2.5 years before we then did the production. We just were put together, you know, because the Barbican was there, and Juliette was there, and then they said, well, there is this art director, Ivo, you should meet. I was working in Lyon, Paris, near to Paris, so we could meet immediately. It was very easy. And then we immediately started to talk about Greek tragedy. That was very strange, because it had been 20 years, my last Greek tragedy. Immediately, we started to talk about that. And it took us a year, I think, of we talked about Electra, we talked about the normal things, you know, the normal, and then we ended up with Antigone together. That's what it is. We both felt that something was there that we could explore together, and that because Antigone is not, it's a very famous title, but it's not a lot of very important productions of it. It's not so easy. So that's why we decided. So that came. So we had worked already, well, not worked, but talked about it together already before. So with her, I had a little bit of preparation, which I don't normally do with actors.
Why?
I think it's... What do you mean, why I don't normally do it? Okay. I don't know. I feel that the work with actors should happen in a rehearsal space. Because also with Juliette, I stopped it at a certain moment. I said, I don't want to talk about it anymore now. That's what it is. I barely explained what my intentions were, because it feels like that should really happen. Listen, in a rehearsal space, I always say just start, and then somebody enters, and then you think, okay, good, that's nice, or no, perhaps come from the other side. You know, it's like trial and error, the whole thing. And the whole preparation that we did, I'm not using that, you know. It's there. It's somewhere in my I have it in my mind, you know, it's somewhere there. And so, but that's why I don't do it, because I think if you talk too much before you go into a rehearsal room, perhaps you will go try to prove that this is right. But no. There is no proof. There is nothing right. You have to find something together. Good. You have to find the ending. You don't have to know the ending.
Yeah. So let me ask about. I mean, what interests me about both that production of Antigone and then both of yours, Deborah, is they came from an actor-director relationship. So they started from quite a personal viewpoint. Yet often we think about these plays as being deeply political, and often they get very political productions and productions that have contemporary resonances. What's your feelings about that? I mean, do you look for a political context or matrix or sense of society when you start on these plays, or?
I mean, I think at that time in my life, very much not. And maybe there is one story to tell about Electra that is worth telling. We made it for the RSC, and then 2 years later we remade it and took it on a tour. And part of that tour was to Derry in the north. And we took it in a week in the Troubles. There'd been a very particularly bad incident of some kids being shot outside of a betting office. So there'd been children caught up in the Troubles, and the wound was very raw at that moment. And in the cast was Fiona from the South. And it happens, and this is my point of the story, that John Lynch who is indeed an actor from the north, were cast as Electra and Orestes. And I had not done this for any reason except that they were both very well suited to play these roles opposite each other. And he's not the boy from earlier with the drug problems. That was 2 years earlier. And we played the play that night, and at the end of the performance, we had just come from Paris, and we were used to applause, and there was nothing. Which is in fact, the most extraordinary night, I think, of my history in the theatre. There was complete silence. The audience didn't clap, and finally, somebody stood up and said, please, could the cast come back and talk to us about this terrible play of grief and revenge and blood and death. And so the cast all came back, and we sat with the people of Derry for an hour, which was very extraordinary. So in terms of, it's very tricky that, because I think if I had cast Fiona and John, and if I had made a point that here lay the Beide Meinhof or the IRA, I think that wouldn't have happened. I think it would have insulted the audience. I think they would have been extremely angry and would have removed themselves from it. But because it was there somewhere in the DNA of the piece and was there for the taking, then this very extraordinary thing happened that night. And I mean, that night alone is indeed the answer to why did the Greeks matter. I mean, they matter colossally, because that night this community actually was sort of knitted together over this ancient text. So it was very extraordinary.
Do you look for political relevance or context, or are they just family stories that?
No, but also now more. Not when I was 25 or 26. I wasn't totally not into the political context of things. But it became much more important for me over the last 15 years, actually. And yes, and also with Antigone. At a certain moment, because I was struggling, also when I was in the middle of preparation, I was struggling with what is it exactly, what is this feeling now, what it is about. And then in the summer, I was in the middle of the preparations together with Jan, my designer, together with Tal. We were talking and talking and talking. And then there was this huge catastrophe happening in Ukraine. Perhaps you remember that Malaysian Airlines 17, but there was 200 Dutch people on board. So in Holland, that was like 9/11 for us, because Holland is not as big. Also, somebody from my company, related to the company, who had played DJ 2 weeks before on the opening party of the Fountainhead that I made, he was in the plane, killed. Just a moment. But what happened there is what I saw is that, and the bodies were laying in the bare field. Remember that? Because nobody could go there. It was middle of the summer, so the bodies were rotting. And that's what, of course, what's happening in Antigone. The body is rotting there, and she is taking care of it. And the same thing happened. Nobody could take care of the bodies. And then Holland did an amazing thing. They brought the bodies home after 2 or 3 weeks it was. And they landed in Eindhoven, it's in the south of Holland, and they had to bring them to the center because the investigation was going on. And they gave every body or body piece a separate hearse. And they drove the 75 hearses, one by one, drove through the whole country, and the whole country, the highways, there was no control. They were empty. People were waiting. There were people standing on the highways, on the bridges. Police left them alone. And against this act of total barbarism in Ukraine, there was this gesture of Antigone, that this is just a normal human thing to do, and that made me. It's a political context, but also an emotional, personal context that brought it, and then I suddenly understood that's what it is about. That's what it is for her about, for Antigone about.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. So just quickly touch on this idea of chorus, because you've both mentioned it. the chorus often maybe are the way we think about society in the Greek plays and a choric voice. And when I was talking to Rob Ike, who's directed Oresteia, I said, how are you going to get it on in one evening, given you were doing all three parts plus a bit of Iphigenia? And he said, oh, the chorus, I'll get rid of the chorus, because the narrative always gets held up there. It's sort of, we stop and we kind of emote, or we ask questions, and actually this is a piece about telling a story, which I thought was interesting and provocative. I mean, it's not exactly what he's done in the end for anyone who's going to see it, so you'll get a surprise. But what for you, how do you find your way into the chorus, or the idea of a chorus, both in Greek drama or maybe sort of politically?
I think Electra's a long time ago, and I think Medea's a little bit closer to me. I mean, I think the chorus and Medea is genuinely interesting. I think without the chorus and Medea, she probably wouldn't do it, the thing she does. She probably wouldn't kill the children. So that's not what the chorus think. The chorus think they're there going, oh, no, don't do that. But they've been in such a discussion, she and the chorus, that in a strange and terrible way, they're really partly responsible for that. I think they are guilty, and I think Medea has no choice but to kill the children, by the way. I mean, for me, that's the most important thing about the play. If she didn't kill them, somebody was going to do it for her. But the chorus could have stopped things much earlier if they'd worked hard. I don't know one can speak generally about the chorus. I think it's the biggest hunt, and I suppose I worked quite hard to have them individuals without being too absolutely fascinating. And I never worked with the chorus in the sense of what we believe they once did. Yes, they didn't all talk together.
So why was it important for you that they were individuals?
I didn't understand who they were otherwise. I mean, simple as that. I think we have to connect to them. We do have to. That's what I think. And did you find those types out of a society that you just outside the front door, as it were, or like what did they draw on as performers? I think in Medea they drew on feeling sorry for somebody who's lost her bloke. Came up to have a chat about it,
right,
and carried on chatting about it until it went really wrong.
Is that difficult in a rehearsal room to manage the
terribly
incredible hierarchy of the protagonist and the
There's
chorus?
something called the Choral Revolt. The Choral Revolt happens around about week 3, when they all realise they're not playing the parts they'd like to have played. And it happened. It certainly happened in Electra. So I was armed by Medea. I was ready. I said, "You're not playing Chrysothemis, and you're not playing Electra." And in the case of Medea, I cross-examined them. I did something I've never done with a large group of actresses. I was ambitious for who they were. I wanted wonderful actresses. But I said, there will be a choral revolt, but there can't be because we haven't got time. I'm not having a choral revolt. So you've got to know that you want to do this. So I'd warn any young director, get ready for the choral revolt, because it'll happen.
Well, I avoided the revolt by giving them roles also. So I had, in Antigone anyway, they were the chorus. And what I did is, also in my casting, my auditions, I really was searching for personalities, actor personalities. Because you have actors, great actors that can act very well, but you have also actor personalities who can just enter a stage and you look at them. And I chose, for actor personalities in this case. And they played the chorus, and then they changed into the individual roles. So that's why I avoided the Choral Revolt, which I had also in Hamburg when I did the Bacchae for the second time. It is in a huge theater, Schauspielhaus, so big institution. So everybody feels very important. And of course, then they are dumped into the chorus with this very young Belgian director, who doesn't even speak very well German, things like that. So that was the same. It went on for a few weeks very well. I went on very well with all, because it's women. It was women, of course, in the Bacchae. But then at a certain moment you get it, like hell. And in the beginning I wanted them to enter and to pee. It's like, I said, well, it's like almost animalistic. Like you come on stage and you just mark your space. They were, in the beginning, they loved that idea, but not at the end anymore. So they really were searching for everything to no, but the chorus is of course, it's something. If as a director you don't want to deal with it, just don't do a Greek tragedy, because for me it doesn't make any sense to do that. And what you said, Rupert, is right, because it holds back the action of the, which is hard, because it's juicy. Then you have a scene, and the scene is a fight, and the fight goes into an argument, and so that's great. And then suddenly people start reflecting on it. But for me, that was one of the main reasons to do Antigone. Well, in Antigone you're lucky, because I consider that as the best chorus of all Greek tragedies. Oresteia is also pretty good, but it's very good, because they are in Medea, as far as I know, they are with her. But in Antigone, the chorus is talking to Creon, but also to Antigone, and they are like us. They are always repositioning, really listening to what somebody is saying, and then sometimes being very critical, sometimes saying deliberately nothing, you know. And in Antigone, it's quite. I think it's quite interesting, but at the same time, it holds back the action, and that you have to, as a director, you really have to reflect deeply about what that means.
Why do you think there are those periods of reflection?
Well, I can only talk about the things that I did, because for in Antigone, it's normally it's the old, because I changed that a little. Well, not a little bit. I totally changed it. It's normally the old people, old advisors of the head of state. I made it into you had a young man, a woman. So because I think these days, to just say that only old people are the advisors of the head of state, it's not the way that we function these days, or that we think. And at the same time, I discovered that it was almost like the subconscious of this society. So that you saw in the scenes what happens in society, and that in these other scenes, in these chorus pieces, because they have also dialogues, but then they have also the chorus songs, as they are called. And that you went into the and Carson, who is also doing Bacchae for You, who is great. She has this beautiful thing at a certain moment in the chorus, archives of grief, and this idea of archives, that became for me this chorus. You know, a kind of a deeper. An archive is not only an archive is a history of a society. It's knowing that there is only a future when you know where you come from, that the present is not only the present, because we love to live in only now, and forgetting. And that's what in Antigone is always coming back. They're referring to older times in order to learn something from it for today or for tomorrow. And that's what it was for me in this case. Great.
Being waved at. So let's just use the last few minutes to throw it open and see if there are any questions at all from the floor about Greeks or indeed these directors' work. Does anyone have anything they want to ask? So the for those who can hear, the question was about the relation between the appalling horror and atrocities of the material and the inherent artifice of theatre and putting it on. And interestingly, Rachel Cusk is doing the adaptation of Medea that I'm working on. I think her starting point was three men dressed up in masks to perform in front of 10,000 men, a sort of voyeuristic exploration of female hysteria. And that I think her way in was to kind of challenge the sort of fetishization of grieving. And I think we've all been in rehearsal rooms where we know what it's like for actors as well to sort of get off, I suppose, to some degree on emotional excesses. And what do you feel about this, Deborah, about this idea?
I think this is an offering to an audience. I think it's a grieving tool. I think art possibly is a grieving tool. I have a feeling that is maybe why it's there. So I think this is the first thing these are, which is offered in the right way. That these are spiritual and profoundly important pieces, and they may allow the audience to go to places they could never go in any other way at all, which only the theatre can offer. And They may be cleansing tools. They really may. It's very complicated, this, because it really does depend what it is that's being offered. You know, this isn't Greek drama and how it's offered. There's 1,000 million ways of how this is communicated. But you know, I think there's enough stories between us here. You know. When I did the Medea in the West End on the opening night, I met a woman who had come because she was defending a woman the next day who'd killed her children and refused to give any defense. So she thought the only thing she could do was come and have a look at this play and question. So I think these are terribly important offerings. I think they are. They define the profound necessity of theatre, and I do think that's what they can do.
I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up now because we have a show on tonight, but I think this idea of reinvention and the Greeks as a healer, I suppose, for audience and for artists is a fascinating way to pull together the idea of how important these plays still are, and a great way to begin our season. Thank you so much, Deborah and Ivo.
Thank you.